Hey guys, this is Keith Baker from Dusty Attic Studio, and today we're going to talk a little bit about RMS and how it affects your output or your total volume of your song. I get a lot of requests asking questions about it. I got a special guest today, Nick Critchley, who's going to go into a lot of detail about it. But for now, I'm just going to start off with the basics. So let me play a tune here, or at least a part of a tune here, and I want you to watch this meter here. This is a level meter. It pretty much represents your main out that's on Studio One. So let me go ahead and play this and take a peek at this. Okay, I'm sure you can see that pretty clearly. What I got going on here is I have, let me bring this over here and pin this so I can open up multiple plugins. I got my limiter here. I have it set really at 0 dB. It's a brick wall limiter. That's probably not a good idea to do. You should probably set your limiter, your brick wall limiter, somewhere around, let's say negative 1.5 and 1.3, simply to give room for the MP3 conversion. But at the moment, I have this one set at 0, just because it makes it a little easier to explain. But what happens is you got a brick wall limiter that's going to catch all your peaks. Down in this area where you saw the white line is my RMS. It's jumping around a lot, but I try to keep on average right around 9, maybe between 12 and 9, negative 12 and negative 9 dB. Average in that area. Of course, it's going to drop a little bit at times when the song quiets down and if a big vocal comes in or something like that. Or gang vocals, it's going to push up higher, but average around there is good. Because what happens here, you got your brick wall limiter set around 0. Your RMS is averaging right around 9, 10, 12. Everything in between there is your dynamic range. Dynamic range is very important. It's where your song breathes. Your RMS actually is what gives you your volume to your ears, which makes it sound louder. That's why a lot of people like to push their volume, their main fader, harder and harder and harder into the brick wall limiter, maybe pushing their RMS up in around the negative 3 dB range, which is only giving you 3 dBs of dynamic range. That's, you're crushing the song, you're losing all your dynamics, and then if you go any further, then you're going to start to get into digital distortion. Like I said, Nick is going to go in a little more into that, but let me show you that one more time. Watch where my RMS is. That is the white line. Watch how this goes. Now, that's pretty good. This is the end of the song, so it's kind of climaxing. That's why the RMS is pushing up a little bit higher. But it's, like I said, it's usually the gang vocals or a snare or a crash or hit on the drums or something like that that kind of shoots it up. But my dynamic range is right around negative 10.4 to 0, and that is a nice dynamic range. Now I'm going to go ahead and push the level up harder into the brick wall limiter, and you're going to hear the volume come up, but it's still not going to go above 0. But then you're going to start to hear the song smash and get distorted. So take a look at this. You could hear how it was starting to get smashed down and starting to get distorted. They're really the loudness war is over. There's no reason to push your RMS up so far to get that big volume, like when you're in your car and you only have to turn it up to 2 to make the windows rattle. That's long gone. Everything's about dynamics now, about making your mix sound good. You know, you spend hours, days, and, you know, if you got work long hours at your regular job, maybe weeks mixing a song. It sounds great, and then you smash it into your brick wall limiter to get all that volume, and then you basically destroyed all your work. So anyway, I am going to turn this over to Nick Critchley. He's going to go in more depth about RMS. He's going to use some examples. He's also going to give you some differences between the stock S1 meter, like the one here on my main. It's jumping around because of my microphone I'm talking on. But he's going to show you the difference between this and your standard old analog style VU meters. So, Nick, I'm handing it over to you, buddy.
Okay, I'm going to try and explain the difference between peak signals and RMS levels. Now, here I have a sine wave signal, stereo signal, but the output is set to mono. It's a sine wave, and if I bring up the scope, you can see what it's like. Next we have a square wave. Next we have a pulsed waveform, which is basically a bass drum, which is a transient waveform. Now I've set each of these in the peak meter to read -10 or thereabouts. And the first thing that becomes apparent is that the square wave sounds actually louder. But if we look at the waveform, compare it to a sine wave, its peak level is actually lower. The reason for it sounding louder is because it has more energy, because it's switching almost instantaneously from one set level to another, and holding it for a period of time, then switching immediately to the negative polarity, holding for a while, switching almost immediately. So the energy in that area is far greater than a sine wave, which is moving slowly from a fixed point up to a peak and then immediately falling again. So to make things clear, you've got two measurements: the peak, which is the topmost signal level, and the RMS, which is 70.7% of the sine wave waveform. It's equivalent to if you had a voltage heating an element, feeding a sine wave of, say, 10 volts. The equivalent DC voltage would be 7.7%, 7.07 volts to achieve the same amount of heat in that heating element. Sorry to be technical, but that's where it comes from. The transient signals have very little energy in themselves, and the peak meter will catch the level because its time constants are a 10 millisecond rise time and a 2-second hold release time. Whereas with a VU meter, it has a 300 millisecond rise time and a 300 millisecond fall time. So it's fairly sluggish as far as transient response is concerned. But with constant waveforms, you can see that they're similar levels. But with a transient, it's way down. So the energy in a constant waveform is far more than in a transient. But the transient has to be taken account of because of the absolute maximum limit of a digital system, which is 0 dB. Anything over that will be distortion and it will sound horrid. Normally we control that parameter with a limiter, and to gain some volume to be able to hear quiet passages and loud passages, you need to set a predefined brick wall limit and then bring the level up so that the RMS level, which is effectively the loudness of the track, is nearer, somewhere around -12, -9. That way you still have a fair amount of dynamic range, so you can hear the loud parts and the quiet parts, but you do not go over into clipping. Now if we look at a loudness meter, and I've got two here, both of them free. There's the Hoffer one, which reads peak levels and a loudness level, which is this middle bar. So and the other one is this. And what can be seen is that the transient waveform produces far less volume whereas the constant waveforms are setting up around -13. So you've got a peaky, which we've already determined is set, the peak level is set exactly the same as the other two, but because of the lack of energy in it, the RMS value or the loudness value is much lower than either of these. We've also determined that a pure sine wave compared with a square wave, the sine wave still sounds quieter even though its peak levels are much higher than the square wave peak level. But because of the amount of RMS energy in a square wave, it sounds louder even though its peak level is a lot less. So neither of these two waveforms are particularly musical. The nearest thing to a sine wave is, I suppose, a flute, and maybe a square wave is a fuzz effect on a guitar which just flattens the top off a sine wave. But neither of them are particularly musical in themselves. So music is made up of both, or a combination of all three, which is why I picked them. So we have transients, which like drums, percussive stuff. Fuzz, which is, guitars, overdriven guitars and things like that. And pure tone, which is anything. Well, most music has pure tones and harmonics of those pure tones to produce the character of the instrument. So hopefully that has cleared up some of the mysteries of why what you hear and what you see don't always make sense. By using a combination of 3 different sorts of meters, we can actually determine A, that we're not clipping, B, that we're actually at a reasonable audible level so that we can hear all of what's going on, and also that we're within reasonable limits as far as loudness goes, as most radio streaming services now have adopted the EBU R128 standard, so our music needs to be within those limits so that we don't get turned down or turned up too much when we're being played on the radio.
So there you have it. Thank you, Nick. That was some impressive stuff right there. I'm sure to many of you that was a lot to take in, but it's something you're going to have to learn. I'm sure you can read up on it on, do some searches on Google. It's not as hard as you think, but it is very important. So I do highly recommend that you check that out. But we're going to go ahead and end this video right now. And I want to thank everybody for stopping by, and thank you, Nick Critchley, for giving me that piece. If you need me or Nick, you can reach us at the Studio One Facebook group. I'll leave a link down below, since this is on YouTube, where you can reach us. You can also reach me at my studio, Dusty Attic Studio, at www.dustyaticstudio.com. And if you have any questions you want to drop down below here on YouTube, you can do that as well. And I'd like to thank you all again for stopping by. See you real soon.